My name's Megan. I'm a homeschool mama too, and welcome to my channel. I gotta tell y'all, I'm really feeling this hair today. Feel like I've got like a little 1970s Farrah Fawcett, Charlie's Angels business going on with these feathers here. I definitely did a little bit of back combing, and you know what? I ran out of hairspray, so I'm really doing the most with the least today. But you know what? That could also be like the title of my memoir, right? Like Megan, homeschool mom, doing the most with the least. Maybe, I don't know. I'm gonna go ahead and say that one's mine. Okay, so if you see anybody else out there with the title of that memoir, just know it originated here, right here. In today's video, I am going to share with you guys 5 books that really fueled my journey to becoming a homeschool mama. Listen, this feels like a really vulnerable video for me because I didn't grow up as a homeschooler. I did not have friends who homeschooled, no family that homeschooled. There was really no positive model as to what homeschooling looked like. It didn't even cross my mind really as an option until I became a parent. And because of that, I think a lot of us, maybe if that's not our journey, if we didn't know somebody who homeschooled or we weren't homeschoolers ourselves, then it really becomes like a conversion experience, right? We have to be moved by some sort of force to homeschool our kiddos. And that journey looks different for everyone. And maybe that's why I say that this video feels a little bit vulnerable, or like I'm showing my hand maybe on what my feelings are on homeschool. So this could probably also be like a little miniature why we homeschool video, but really I just wanted to share with you guys some resources that really inspired and helped create the vision and foundation for our little homeschool that we have today. The first book that really got me to consider homeschooling was actually by accident. I did not pick up this book because I wanted to learn about homeschooling. I picked up this book because we were getting prepared or dreaming of becoming homesteaders. And that book is Homegrown by Ben Hewitt. I'm going to put an image of the cover here, and I will of course link all of these books down below. Like I said, when I first purchased Homegrown, I did so because it was a narrative about the author's own experience of raising his 2 children on a homestead in Vermont with his wife, Penny. And I bought that because we had big dreams of homesteading, which we did do for 3 years. And I wanted to read a firsthand account of what family life really looked like when you were choosing to move off of a traditional parenting or lifestyle path. And really, I just needed somebody to tell me it was all right, but also for somebody to tell me how to do it. And that's what I was really seeking with this book. And I ended up finding so much more than that. So like I mentioned previously, Ben Hewitt is an author, and he is also a homesteader and farmer. He writes lots of books, particularly about food politics, and I had picked this one up, and in the process of reading it, fell in love with the image of family life that he presented, and a huge portion of that was the choice to homeschool. This book for me really romanticized the idea of homeschooling, and I don't mean that as a dig. It really was the first time that it opened my heart to the idea that, hey, you know what? There can be an alternative to putting your kids into public school system. And as a public school teacher at the time, I was really starting to pick up on some of those things that I just felt uncomfortable with, that didn't sit right with me as a choice that I could make for my kiddos. And seeing what Ben was really reading his experiences and seeing this beautiful life that he had created. And really, not only did it introduce me to homeschooling, which is like step 1, right? But then it pushed me a little bit further into the concept of unschooling. And although we are not unschoolers, I do still hold a huge part of the principle of unschooling as a massive foundation of our homeschool philosophy, if you will. And that's really respect for our children, respect for their individuality, the things that they want to pursue. I wanted to foster an environment that my kids could become just exactly who they were meant to be, if you want to believe in that sort of ideology, or the most interesting and open versions of themselves. I wanted them to be independent little thinkers and human beings, and this book gave me that big picture vision and kind of sent me down on this rabbit trail that is home education. And like so many of us who come to this not by family history or nature, it does become, once you get that one little taste, right? Like, ooh, maybe I want to try this. You have to start devouring everything. Anything I could get my hands on that was about the philosophy of home education, that was about the different types of home education, the psychology behind home education, the sociology, the practice, the theory. I just wanted it all. And that never would have started if I had not read Homegrown by Ben Hewitt. I really suggest it, even if you think unschooling is not for you. It's also just a lovely read about what sounds to be a beautiful family and their life in Vermont. Maybe giving you a more updated, I don't know, Little House on the Prairie feel, right? We are getting into snuggle season. I've got my big old sweater on. And so if you're needing a read for you as a home educator to kind of bring some, Julie Bogart would call, enchantment back into your homeschool, I really, really suggest this book. Okay, so reading Ben Hewitt's Homegrown gave me the courage to admit that homeschooling was actually something that I wanted to pursue. And this was about 4 years ago. So my oldest daughter was 3. And once I made that decision, I was really feeling that pressure because I knew that I had 2 years before she needed to attend compulsory education. And for us, financially, homeschooling was absolutely not an option in that moment of our lives. My husband had just finished grad school, or he even was finishing grad school. I was our sole breadwinner as a public educator. We did not have the financial flexibility necessary to homeschool, because believe me, I do recognize that the ability to homeschool is a privilege. And we knew right then that we had 2 years to try to get our you-know-what together to make homeschooling a reality for our oldest child. So we were busting our buns to get our ducks in a row so that I could stay home and homeschool. And it really did take us a full 2 years to even make that happen. And I really point to this part of my career as a public school teacher. I mean, I had been teaching for 3 years. I was going to teach for 2 more, but I had made this philosophical transition, and snarkily, I like to refer to this time period in my career. It felt like every day going to work was like attending church if you no longer believed in God. And I really had a lot of depression because of that. Going to work felt very heavy for me. And this next author that I'm going to suggest is really who got me through that time period. And that is going to be Pam Larikia. Now, Pam Larikia has written several books on home education, and I will link her website below. Now, I have not read any of her books, but I devoured her podcast, Exploring Unschooling, and I will link that below as well. My draw towards unschooling is a really kind of a theme here, but it was almost as if I needed to push my mind to the furthest extreme away from traditional schooling to find or start to create what it was that I wanted to do in our homeschool. And this is a real process, right? Deschooling, it's a real thing. And Pam Larikia is who held my hand through that entire experience. And that was because every morning on my way to work, I would listen to an episode of her podcast, Exploring Unschooling. It is such a simple format, her podcast, but it is so powerful. Every episode, she is interviewing another home educator and just talking about their experiences in home education. For some of them, they're still in the thick of it, and that's lovely to hear about the struggles, right? Get that taste of what it's really like in the trenches. But she would also interview parents who were far removed from their time as home educators. And you really got to see that, backwards look through their experience and be encouraged by the success that they had in creating beautiful, happy children and a wonderful family relationships because of their choice to home educate. And she has such a variety of guests, like from people who are road schooling to farm schooling to unschooling to game schooling, whatever. And it was also just a huge jumping off point for me for finding so many different resources, and it was a way that I could consume them really quickly. So I would say that I was spending 30 to 45 minutes a day because of my commute listening to this podcast and being encouraged, okay, this is something I can really do because this is something people have already done. Okay, and that's powerful feeling, right? We're already having to be kind of pioneers in our own communities. So it's nice to hear stories of people who are going down that path with you or who have already blazed the trail and are saying like, come on, you can do this too. So I actually found this next author through Pam Larikia's podcast, Exploring Unschooling. And that, of course, is John Holt, and specifically discussing his book, How Children Fail. So if you've spent any time looking into the philosophy or history of home education in the United States, then you have probably come across John Holt. He was a writer, an activist, a former educator, and he really pushed for homeschooling and the philosophical theories as to why that worked so well for raising independent, curious children. His book, Why Children Fail, was written based off of his observations as a classroom teacher, and it resonated so much with me because his observations were exactly what I was seeing in my classroom, even though we were teaching decades apart and teaching totally different age groups. Now, if you read How Children Fail and you're feeling bummed, don't worry, because then of course he is the companion piece of How Children Succeed. And that's a good read as well. But it was really this book, How Children Fail, that was starting to boost my confidence behind my own choices. Now, without this video becoming like a full-blown book report, I do just want to share with you a few of the tenets that I found to be most powerful from this particular text. The first thing that I really connected with was the idea that children in the classroom, the drive for them to learn is not curiosity, but that the drive for them to learn is to seek the approval and praise of their teachers and those who are in authority. His argument is that the traditional classroom setting really devalues education and encourages obedience. And I think that's to be true. And honestly, in my little heart of hearts, I just wish to be some sort of anarchist rebel. And that sort of idea just really latched on to, I don't want to get too hyperbolic here, but it really latched onto my heart. The second argument that he brings up in that book that really rung true for me in my experiences as a teacher was that traditional school systems kind of turn kids from being thinkers into producers. And that was so powerfully worded for what I was seeing. It really gave a name to what I was seeing in the kids in my classroom. My children that I was teaching, because no fault of their own, but because of the system that they had experienced, they were not seeking education for education's sake, but they were looking to produce a product. And that overall, not only was that their education or their grade, but also themselves, right? That they were presenting themselves as a product to be consumed by praise or by accolades. And that was just incredibly disturbing. And the third thing is that really that this traditional system was raising children to only aim for the right answer through testing or otherwise, and using kind of a form of humiliation or degradation to enforce that conformity and obedience. I know, you guys, these are like some pretty radical thoughts, right? Some pretty radical statements. And I'm not anti-public schooling. That is really the truth. But I'm just telling you, in my search to become a homeschooler, I had to break down everything that I had previously held to be true for myself. that deschooling was a painful and very in-depth process. And you guys, when you read these books, you take what you need from them, right? And you know what? John Holt, he's so admired, and you can disagree with him. Okay, that's fine. That's perfect. That's wonderful. He would be so pleased if you disagreed with his writing and could articulate it in a way that could convince others that he was wrong. The next book was probably, I'm kind of listing these for you in the chronological order that I discovered them, but the next book was huge in forming my choice to home educate my children, and that is Free to Learn by Peter Gray. And of course, like all the rest, it is linked below. Now, Peter Gray is a research psychology professor at Boston College, and he has written several books about education, the psychology of children in education, and the importance of play in education, and really just the mental health of children. This book really gave me the research, right? The evidence-based research that I needed to justify my decision. To who? I don't know. Who am I like? I'm not writing a thesis or trying to convince somebody that I can home educate my children, but it was just kind of that part of my brain that needed to see this evidence-based approach, right? That's thrown around all the time in public school. I needed to see that to feel, again, that confidence, kind of keeping my back straight about the choices that I was making for my kids. Although the book spends a ton of time talking about the importance of play in terms of a child's development and education, really the bit of research that stuck with me the most was the research and evidence that he was presenting about the rise in anxiety disorders amongst kids, especially that adolescent, like 12 to teenager age, because that's exactly what I was seeing in my middle school and high school classrooms. Every year, it was just an increased number of children experiencing high anxiety disorders, missing days of class due to anxiety, etc., etc. And the research that he laid out in his book made so much sense as to why there's that growing pressure, right? The increased amount of pressure put on children to be producers, to use Holt's phrase, to get those grades, to really like have their lives be curated and monitored for adults. And I mean for adults because so much of what was happening, like the accolades for children that I saw in my public school, it was really for the kind of good graces of adults, or for adults to be able to say to their superiors what their children or their students were producing. And I found that to be so true. I was an AP US history teacher, and it's suggested by College Board, I think, that kids take no more than 3 AP courses, but you would have hundreds of students. This is a very large school. You would have hundreds of students taking 5+ AP courses a semester. And if you were to even look at the amount of homework time suggested for each of those courses, those children did not have enough time in the day to complete the necessary work. And then, of course, when their grades did not reflect what they desired, they would really collapse. There was no motivation outside of those grades for them and their education. And I do not blame the students for that at all, you guys. That was the system in which they were raised. And that's another thing that Peter Gray really brings up, is this push for kids to work towards grades. And I saw that. You call it grade grubbing, you call it whatever you want, but it was the students cared not for themselves, their own curiosity, their own education. It was simply for that grade, which is bizarre because with grade inflation as it was, I mean, you got 10 points added to your overall grade just for being in honors, and then an additional 10 points if you were in AP. So you could make a 68 in a class and it's somehow going to reflect in your GPA that you had an 88. So they were constantly chasing after these grades that were increasingly non-reflective of anything. And it also created an incredibly adversarial relationship between student and teacher. It really did. And guys, 2 things that are true stories. Number 1, increasingly in the district that I worked for, administrators were referencing children as customers and parents or community leaders as stakeholders. And I just found that language of economy being applied to education to be so scary and harmful. The next thing is absolutely true. I actually used Peter Gray's book and research to convince my administrator that the last semester of school, I was giving every single person in my AP US history class a 100, regardless of what they did in class. And I stand by that decision, and it was the best semester that I ever had teaching ever, because the kids, the pressure of that grade fell away. Our relationship as educator to student strengthened so much, and we had the best time following our curiosities and the conversations that fostered in that classroom that semester were some of the deepest and most intellectually enriching conversations that I ever had with students. And all we had to do was remove that pressure of a grade. Okay, the next author and book that I want to tell you guys about, I still go back and read this author's articles or short books when I just need to feel fired up about home education, get that political passion back in me, because choosing to homeschool, for no matter what your reason is, it is a political choice. Even if you are an apolitical individual, you are making that choice to step out of the norms of the structure that society has set forth for the education of our kiddos. So you're a rebel, and you just didn't even know it, right? But that is John Taylor Gatto, and specifically talking about his book, Dumbing Us Down. Now, John Taylor Gatto was an author and educator for over 30 years. And let me tell you, if you want to be entertained, you should look up some of the speeches that John Taylor Gatto gave over his career. More than once, he was voted his state's Teacher of the Year, his district's Teacher of the Year, right? He had these amazing accolades for being a public school teacher. And then at these giant ceremonies with press and everything, he would stand up and give these speeches where he would just eviscerate all of the bureaucracy that gets tied up in education and really pull the veil back on what we're doing for students and why it's not in the best interest for students, and it is for the best interest of adults. So I just want to go over a couple of the points that he makes repeatedly throughout all of his works, not just Dumbing Us Down, that make him a real inspiration and hero for my homeschool. Now, John Taylor Gatto falls into that Holt, Peter Gray sort of school of thought, and that schools raise children to be emotionally independent, as well as educationally dependent, right? They're not going to seek out their own learning. They're only going to stick with what they are taught. That it is confusing for children because we present them with mass amounts of information that don't seem connected to reality or their own lives. We test them on it and then never bring it back up again. It also teaches children that they are never alone because they are continuously supervised. Therefore, they give up a lot of their own autonomy or even self-control because there's always that supervisor or authority figure there to do it for them, right? This is what I'm talking about. You're going to get fired up. It's going to light a fire underneath you for home education. John Taylor Gatto also suggests that a main function of the school system is to produce children who are very similar, who respond in predictable ways to authority, who accept their position in society, which was deemed for them by somebody else. All of those things, he's definitely a promoter of the individual and definitely kind of removing that infantilization of children that we have imposed upon them. I know that I am making that sound so theoretical, but it is grounded in his work with actual anecdotal evidence and research that make it feel very real, very tangible. All right, you guys, I spent a good 2 years of my life doing nothing but raising a toddler and consuming material on the theories and practices and psychology of homeschooling. I hope that I've given you some resources that, if you're starting on this journey, can really help to build your foundation for what you want your homeschool to look like. And if you're already a homeschooler who's just looking for maybe some reads to build or reignite that passion for homeschooling, I hope that I've led you in the right direction. I also read lots of inspirational text as well about homeschooling. Love myself some Julie Bogart, but I gotta tell you, it was these 5 books that really built the foundation for my decision to homeschool my kiddos. So you know what? Is it perfect? No. No, baby. It was never gonna be perfect, okay? But is it done? For today it is. So until next time, bye!